There were 9 craft in Area 51 when he was there in the early 80s.
Welcome to this week's episode of Does That Make Sense? On today's episode, we continue part 2 of UFO Sightings Expert Reveals.
Dr. Roger Stankovic from MUFON joins us as we talk about Roswell, Area 51 and other evidence pointing to UFO sightings. Let's continue the conversation. One of the biggest cases that everybody knows of is Roswell, which occurred in 1947. Yep. So it's quite a significant case. Now, with Roswell, there was apparently a crash site. Is that correct?
Yeah, famous crash site, yeah.
So with that crash site, there would have been, a craft material. Has that ever... Can you talk to us about Roswell and what's real and what's not real? Or
it's sort of become part of pop culture now, so it's like what is real and what isn't.
I first heard about Roswell in 1987. That was a while ago. I hope I'm not giving my age away here. But I was sitting on a train going from Sydney to Newcastle, and there was a newspaper that someone discarded or just left on the train seat, and I picked it up and I started reading it just because I thought, oh, well, it's a paper, I'll just start reading it. And I saw this little column in it saying, something about a UFO crash and debris. And I thought, oh my God, what's that about? Because I was, very interested in UFOs at that time. Basically I thought, oh, I must investigate this. So I tried to look into it. And it was difficult because, the internet wasn't around, and I had to do research, the hard way. And basically, I read about this publication that a guy called Timothy Good from the United Kingdom had made, and it had some details about some documents that were leaked about, allegedly about presumably about the Roswell incident. So I tried to locate that book, and I found that there was one copy left in the Central Coast, and I made sure I rang that bookstore and got the copy, and then I found these documents that were allegedly leaked about the Roswell incident and sent them, photocopied them and sent them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where allegedly the crash debris was taken to. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I got a letter back from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base within 2 weeks of sending a letter, and I thought, wow, that was quick. Mm-hmm. But they were just completely debunked it, saying there's nothing to this. There was no crash, blah blah blah, which is what they do normally. The public relations officer will just tell you it just didn't happen, and we're not researching UFOs. But I thought it was very interesting that knee-jerk reaction they, I didn't even mention UFO in my letter. I actually just photocopied the documents and sent them, and I said, can you please explain this? Yeah. And the documents said that there was a crash in 1947, debris was retrieved, and bodies were retrieved. Oh. So, so apparently there were occupants within the craft which and one of them apparently survived. But initially, if you go way back into this study, Stanton Friedman, who is now deceased, was the original investigator of this. In 1978, he actually interviewed Jesse Marcel. He was giving a lecture, and one of the he was obviously interested in UFOs. I don't know whether you've heard of Stanton Friedman. He was a very big researcher, and one of the best researchers in ufology. He was giving a lecture, and he was speaking about UFOs, and somebody stopped him and said, "Did you hear about the Roswell incident?" He said, "No." And so he started investigating it in 1978, and basically he spoke to the original person who touched the material and who actually picked up the material, and his name was Jesse Marcel. He was one of the most highest ranking officers in the 509th Bomb Division in Roswell at the time, and he examined the material and showed it to his son in the middle of the night. He brought some home and showed his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., who is now deceased as well. And he said that he'd never seen anything like it. The debris didn't really fit in with a weather balloon or a mogul balloon, because he definitely thought that there was some sort of cover-up. But the interesting thing about Roswell is that the Air Force actually approached the media initially and said, we found a crashed flying disc. Now, they didn't say we found crashed debris. They said we found a disc, which is very different to that.
Yeah.
And so after that, a day or two after that, there was an attempt to quash the whole thing. And basically, there was another statement made in the papers and everywhere that it was actually just a weather balloon. And wow, that's a big turnaround, going from a flying disc to a weather balloon. And there's absolutely no way it would have been a weather balloon. And the guy that the Jesse Marcel himself stated that there's absolutely no, he knew there was a cover up, and he even staged for a photograph to say that this is a weather balloon. He was told to stick to that argument that it was a weather balloon. But when Stanton Friedman interviewed him, he said there's absolutely no way it was a weather balloon. In 1995, the Air Force again did a backflip and said, okay, it's not a weather balloon. We lied to you. And we're actually saying now it's a mogul balloon. Wow. Okay. So what's the difference between a weather balloon and a mogul balloon? A mogul balloon is a much bigger balloon. Big deal. It's a much bigger balloon. Yeah. And it was released to actually determine whether there were atomic explosions in the USSR at the time. So it had sensors on it which could pick up vibrations of atomic blasts in the atmosphere. So, but again, there's problems with the mogul balloon theory as well. There's inconsistencies there. It was supposed to have been let go on the 4th of June, I think, and it was flight number 4. And if the Air Force was so worried and about this balloon being so sensitive, why was the Air Force trying to cover this thing up when basically they released a mogul balloon, it crashed, and they never retrieved it? They just waited for a rancher to pick it up and tell them, hello, I found this balloon in my, on this ranch. And actually the Air Force had threatened the lives of several of the witnesses, saying, if you tell anyone, we'll kill you. We'll take you out to the desert where no one will find your body. Why threaten so many witnesses, about something that they never went to retrieve in the first instance? Yeah. It just doesn't make sense.
Makes your mind boggle.
And tell us a little bit about Area 51, because that's sort of, I know there's been books written on it, and you also mentioned Project Blue Book, and that was a series that was on SBS last year, I think it was, or recently. So I think they talk about Area 51 there. A lot of YouTubers have been going outside Area 51. So I think even, younger kids are hearing about Area 51. What is Area 51 and what's its connection to Roswell?
Area 51 was only, I think it was, the buildings were initially put there in 1955. So it's way after Roswell.
Right. Okay.
When Roswell happened in 1947, the crash debris of whatever it allegedly was taken to, I think, Carswell Air Force Base initially, and then to Wright-Patterson. Some people are speculating that it might have gone to Los Alamos, but basically it couldn't have gone to Area 51. If you speculate that it might have gone later to Area 51, there's no evidence for it. That I know of. I mean, I could be corrected there, but I don't know of anyone saying anything about any of the crash debris from Roswell going to Area 51. But there was a guy who worked at Area 51 who was employed there by Edward Teller by the name of Robert Lazar, and he actually know a friend of his very well, and he worked with him on a daily basis. And Bob Lazar, his claim to fame was that he actually worked on he actually saw a UFO being attempts at reverse engineering a UFO. He said that there were 9 craft in Area 51 when he was there in the early 80s, and he had actually entered one of the craft, and
Wow.
And said that he had an ominous feeling when he went inside the craft, and he actually described how they operated on an anti-gravity system. So there's that aspect of it, but none of those craft that he'd seen was from the Roswell incident. So there's no connection there as far as I'm aware. Area 51 is basically a flat plain. It's like a lake that was very dried out, and basically they do testing there of experimental aircraft. The government denied its existence until recently. It does exist, definitely does exist, but all that I know is that it was built in 1955. It's still there. That who knows what they do there? No one's got access. Not even the president really doesn't really know what's going on there, and that's a bit of a worry. Basically, the only thing I know about Area 51 is Bob Lazar's accounts of when he was there and when he worked for his supervisor and on several vehicles. So he actually worked on what he called the sports model, and it was a smaller UFO, and he actually witnessed it being taking off, and he had to sort of like work out how it actually worked based on an anti-gravity system. It had a little cyclotron on it. So that's all I know, and that's all speculation. He did actually work at Los Alamos. There's absolute proof that he worked at Los Alamos, and but we can't prove that he actually was an employee in Area 51.
Essentially, what you're saying is like potentially Area 51 is an area where they've captured like UFO vehicles or flying saucers, for the layman's term, and they're located potentially at Area 51.
Let me just clarify this. That they were never at Area 51 as far as I was aware, but it was at Papuas Lake, which is another area near Area 51, which was called S4. Now, S4, according to Bob Lazar, is an underground, or it's an underground facility, or it's built into the mountains. So if you go to Papuas Lake, which is about 15 kilometres away from Area 51, you can't see anything, but apparently there's hangar doors that are on the side of the mountain that have been sprayed with sand that and they lift up, and basically you go into S4. That's where Bob worked, apparently, or allegedly. So basically that's where these vehicles were stored. Bob was asked where did they come from, and he said from archaeological digs. That's what's coming from his mouth, not mine. Basically, these are ancient craft, apparently, that he saw. So yeah, that's where they got them, not from Roswell. I don't know whether any of them were crashed and retrieved. I don't know.
So it's obviously hugely classified. They keep things under wrap. Is that just not to scare or create fear in people, or?
So it's multifactorial. Basically, it's the government wants to, if they ever did find or ever did come into contact with a crashed extraterrestrial vehicle, they would want to keep that secret because they would want to reverse engineer it and try and get the technology and utilize that technology. But also there's the impact that would have on society in general across the world. People would have to completely change their worldview paradigm, and basically that could be earth-shattering to some people in terms of religion, in terms of economy, etc., etc.
Now, you mentioned earlier at Roswell that they captured some alien beings, and one was still alive. So do you know what's happened to that? Is it still alive? Like, what do you know much more information about that particular being?
You get different stories from different sources, that apparently it survived only a short period of time, and they tried to communicate with it, but unsuccessfully, I think. And there was the notorious autopsy video which came out, which Jamie Santilli had said that it was real, but it was found to be a hoax. Although that may not preclude the fact that there might be a real film out there, but his film was definitely a hoax. It's hard to say what happened to this creature. There's rumours out there that JFK, John F. Kennedy, had been taken to an Air Force base, including Richard Nixon and a few other presidents prior to in the 60s who'd actually seen the bodies. There's rumour that he told Marilyn Monroe that he'd seen creatures in this hangar, and that she was going to when she had a tiff with him and Robert Kennedy, she was going to release this information to a famous reporter called Dorothy Kilgannon at the time, and then she was dead shortly after that.
Okay.
Wow. So, and there's a memo by the then one of the intelligence officers in the CIA or the FBI, no, the CIA, James Angleton, had released a memo about a phone tapping incident where Kilgannon was actually discussing this because her phones were tapped as well, and unfortunately Dorothy Kilgannon was found dead several years later as well.
Wow.
Involving, she was very interested in how Marilyn died and how John F. Kennedy died, and she had her own ideas and theories about that, but she was actually found deceased under very unusual circumstances, very similar to Marilyn Monroe. So, you know, it could involve your life if you actually dig too deep in this subject.
Of course. Now, can we go, have you got any other questions about that?
No.
Can we go a little bit closer to home? We're from Melbourne, Victoria. Now, there was an incident at I believe it's a high school called Westall High School in a suburb called Clayton South. Now, it occurred in 1966, and apparently a craft landed in a schoolyard. All the kids were out there. I don't know. I'm a bit sketchy on the details, but do you know much about that?
I know a guy who is in his mid-80s who actually went out there and investigated it. He's a good friend of mine, and unfortunately he couldn't find anything, but that's not to say that there wasn't anything there. Apparently there were about 400 witnesses. Not all the witnesses were school students. Teachers, there was a teacher that was a witness and actually took a photograph of the object. His camera was confiscated, and the evidence was never located. Basically, there were people that witnessed the objects who weren't in the school grounds. So these are people who were out in the suburbs who also witnessed the craft. And there were, I think, 7 pilots in the air at the time who apparently witnessed, or at least one of them witnessed the UFOs, the flying saucers, and basically even took chase. And apparently that guy is still alive in a nursing home, and I'm not sure whether he was interviewed before. I don't know whether he's still alive, but there's speculation that he actually saw the objects in the sky. Now, the story behind it is basically that these kids were, I don't know whether it was during lunchtime or whatever, but they some kids were in class, and some of the kids were in the playground, and one of the students saw something unusual. She mentioned it to other students, and then it just like a domino effect happened where all the students were alerted about these objects in the sky. They all came out to have a look. The teachers were notified about it. One of the teachers took a photograph and is convinced that it was something highly unusual. All the kids saw, well, not all the kids, but most of the kids saw these discs. One of them landed. One of them tried to come up close to one of the objects, and there is evidence that in some of the landing sites near the Grange, basically there were circular impressions in the grass, and although people weren't allowed in that area where this evidence was found. There's been speculation that it could have been Project Highball, which was one of the programs where the government was releasing high-altitude balloons to sample the atmosphere for radiation at the time. Now, I think that I believe that that's not true. I don't think that the balloons were obviously a different shape. I don't know how the kids could have actually mistaken a weather balloon for something like a UFO. Or mistaken a UFO for something as like a weather balloon. There's some researchers that believe that that is still the case, that it could have been a highball balloon, but we've got the physical evidence in the ground. We've got the teachers convinced that it was something different and unusual, and we've got observers that are independent observers, some in the sky in planes, some on the ground outside the school, etc., saying that they'd seen something highly unusual.
And it would be very difficult to argue with over 400 people that have seen the same thing.
Exactly.
It's not one person, it's not two people, it's quite a large number of people from all walks and all ages of life. So, but talking about the markings on the ground, that has been another thing that has been in connect with UFOs, I guess, is that there are a lot of perfectly formed circular markings on remote films like cornfields and things like that. What's your knowledge of what these are, and has the soil been tested or looked at to see what has actually created these perfect circular forms?
So basically, what you're referring to are crop circles. So
yes, that's the one.
In a long-winded explanation, and down the two words, crop circle.
I told you I'm pretty
Crop
good
circles,
at waffling.
Yeah, you are. I find them very interesting. So my things that really interest me about this phenomenon is the actual physical evidence. And so I mentioned to you how passionate I am about animal mutilations and things like that, because it's this physical evidence you can actually test. Well, these crop circles are also physical evidence that you can actually test. And the thing is that we have had them worldwide. We have had them in Australia. Unfortunately, I've never actually gone into one in Australia. I've never seen one in Australia physically, like myself. But they do occur a lot in England, to a certain degree in the States, and they're very unusual. Some can be man-made, some are not. Definitely not man-made. Yeah. Now, that the general impression is, and by the public and a lot of people, is that they're all man-made. Now, let me state this, that there are certain crop circles that cannot be man-made, on the simple basis that there are no planks used to press the stalks down. That's what people do. They get a string on the end of two parts, either end of a plank. They put their foot on the plank and they go around the crop and make circles and make intricate patterns. And yes, you can make highly intricate patterns. Even man-made ones can be highly intricate, but the ones made by other things, or ET, if we could speculate, are basically not made that way. You can't see marks on the stalks by the planks. And the way that the stalks are bent over is, we think, microwave radiation. And the microwave radiation interacts with the nodule of the stalk and forms what's called an expulsion cavity. And so a microwave will hit the node of a stalk of a cereal crop. It'll boil the water within that node, and to the extent that it'll explode and cause the stalk to actually bend over. And that's how it's done. And this, apparently, this is done within seconds. So the entire intricate crop circle is laid down within seconds. Whereas a man, if it's a man-made one, they're going to be out there in the fields for hours, if not days, creating a crop circle using planks. It's crazy. And there were these two old guys in the 90s that fessed up in the UK saying, "Oh, we created all these crop circles. We're now saying that apparently one of them is deceased already, but the crop circles are still happening. So basically, it's rubbish that all these crop circles are man-made. In fact, even the MI6, which were part of the intelligence agencies in the UK, they have been creating some of these crop circles to try and muddy the waters when it comes to understanding exactly how these crop circles are made. They've been known to actually been involved in actually trying to just muddy the water. It's crazy.
Right. Roger, can I ask, there always seems to be more UFO sightings in the USA. I mean, is there more in the USA, or is it that there's more groups sort of looking into cases, such as, an organisation like MUFON, which has a lot of chapters in the US? So are there more cases in the US?
Statistically, there are more cases in the United States, but only because I think that, you can't put it down to population necessarily, but basically we do get reports everywhere in the world, including a lot in Europe, a lot in the UK, a lot in Australia. But people, I think, in the United States, I think it's because of the fact that, the Roswell incident had highlighted the presence of something unusual happening in the United States many years ago. People are more aware of UFOs, I guess. I don't know.
Yes.
Their general inquisitiveness, basically the population's, I suppose, brought up with Roswell and Project Blue Book and all this. We don't know what's happening in Russia. I mean, in the USSR previously, I'm sure that they had, hundreds, if not thousands, of reports of UFOs throughout the decades, and I'm sure that they did. And in Europe, so we're not just seeing reports from the United States, but majority of them tend to come from there. There's no rhyme and reason as to why. I don't think that ET necessarily wants to go to the United States. If so, they would be going there to actually investigate nuclear warheads and stuff like that. And you'll find that there's, bases in the UK. There was, in 1980, there was a very interesting case in Suffolk where a UFO was actually seen by military people in Rendlesham Forest. You might have heard of that incident where a UFO was seen scouting around an area where there were hangars there with an underground base where they were storing nuclear warheads in the Cold War. So and nobody knew about that.
Right.
There was an American air base there as well at Woodbridge. So UFO sightings occur worldwide. In MUFON, our statistics state that the States is way up there in terms of sightings.
Okay. And a big question for me is, we have the Great Pyramids, and there's always talk about how these Great Pyramids were formed. We've got the Stonehenge. We have all these amazing ancient sites that we look at, and they're built with such precision and at a time of where they're not technically advanced as we are today. Do you think there is a connect with aliens?
I don't know, and I'd rather not speculate. I mean, I know there's, Eric von Daniken was very big. His stories were quite well received by the world population. When he was talking about the Aztecs and the pyramids and all this, and how it could be related to extraterrestrials. I can't really comment on it. Yeah.
It's fascinating for me, because I look at ancient sites and I just think, How were they created? They surely man couldn't have done that.
There's this thing called ley lines that people have drawn on the map on the map of the world, and basically they connect ancient sites. And then there is some speculation that there's more UFO sightings on their ley lines, but I don't know.
Okay, so you're an analytical man, and you live and breathe statistics and mathematics from our little bit of research on you. Now, personally, do you believe in UFOs and ETs?
I think that if you just stack up all the evidence, as if you would in a law of court, court of law, I beg your pardon, law of court, court of law, it's getting late. Basically, if you could decide yourself as to whether, and if you dig into the subject, it's like a rabbit hole. It's just unbelievable how much evidence there is that would, that would stand up in a court of law easily as being, a positive result, as that, there's something happening. And with the recent, video from the Nimitz and the Go Fast and the gimbal videos that have come out from the States recently involving military people and more, more videos. How could you not believe? How could you not if you're a rational person? How could you not say that there is nothing to this phenomenon? So it's not so much a belief system. I don't necessarily believe it. I just stack up the evidence and say, well, there's definitely something to this. You've got to be rational about it. You can't be completely, you can be a true believer based on the evidence. And that's all I can. That's the attitude that I take.
And so do I.
Yes, it's been fascinating. It really has. It's just
thank you.
Look, thanks so much for coming on the show. And if people want to find out more about MUFON, how can they do that? So
we've got a website. It's based in the States, and if you just Google up MUFON, MUFON, it'll take you to that website, and you can actually, if you go through the website, it'll show you how to become a member, or if you want to become a field investigator, you can go through that website.
And we'll include all of those links on the episode details as well.
Thanks very much. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, Antoinette, and thanks, Amanda. Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's been interesting. I could just go on and on for hours.